No, it's the most extreme environment
No.
on the planet
Wow.
because even if you're in Antarctica, you're on dry land. So if you're imagine you're on a sled in Antarctica, you can step off the sled onto dry land. And the weather is severe, but it's not like the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean, firstly, it's water. You can't walk on it. You can't breathe it. So as soon as you fall off the boat, it's all over.
Wow.
Because there's no land mass, the storms are out of this world. The waves build continuously because there's nothing to stop them. I slept basically with a seatbelt strapping me down to the bed because if I didn't, I would get tossed from one side of the boat to the other. Sailing is a very technical exercise, and I was doing it in a very technical way. And I'm embedded in a very technical part of navigation. That you have that intuitive part of your brain turned off, but embedded in nature like that. And when I again I'm talking about good policy, and the thing about planning, and this is counterintuitive, that you have to be divorced from the outcome and completely and utterly embedded in the moment.
Mm.
And when you can get completely embedded in the moment, which is really hard in normal civilization because life just sort of impacts on you. When you're completely embedded in the moment, I call those places very, very thin places because not very much separates you from those things in the world and the universe in particular that are far greater than you.
Speaking to Bert terHart, lots of credentials here. I'm going to read them out because I can't remember them, unfortunately. He's a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, explorer in residence for the BC Historical Society, founder of the Canadian Interactive Waterways Initiative, CEO of LeadBrain.ai. I spoke to him before we started recording, and the remarkable thing, apart from all of these titles, is that he actually went around the world sailing, and he's one of the 9 people, the only 9 people that have ever managed to do this. And you have another accomplishment with sailing. Bert, what was it?
Uh, well, we talked very briefly about paddling across Canada
Yes.
in a canoe. So, yeah, coast to coast across the continent. I
Yeah.
paddled a continent. If Yeah, seems crazy, but there you go.
Fantastic. You're a scientist, you're a business person, probably lots of other things. Let's talk about achievement and success. How did you motivate yourself, or what drove your success in all of these endeavors?
Well, I've never been able to say no to something that I'm passionate about. If there's something that I'm passionate about, it sparks my interest. It just doesn't draw my attention. It sparks my interest. And that's literally like throwing for me, it feels like throwing a match into a bucket of gasoline. So and I can't imagine living my life any other way. And it's allowed me to have enough interest and to have as many whys as you would need to succeed when things get really hard. So it was I've and because your passions, anyone's passions tend to be aligned. All the different things I've done are aligned, even though they might seem wildly different. So
Mm.
I was
There's
in the
always
Canadian
the red
Special.
thread, yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's the thread that binds it all. So that binds how I ended up in the Special Service Force in the Canadian Army, how I ended up, being a scientist, how I ended up being a serial entrepreneur, I guess, and how I ended up, being this this explorer slash adventurer. And all of that is tied by my passions, and those passions are well aligned. So even though these things are wildly disparate, that doesn't mean that they're not. Uh, that they're not bound together in some way. And in order to succeed in all those environments, I have a very simple set of tools that I use, and anyone can use them. But as we talked about earlier, the key ingredient is simply persistence.
Yes, I've heard a lot about persistence. I've heard a lot about creating your own luck through cultivating your character as well. And I suppose this is your recipe. The
Hmm.
persistence is your recipe to shaping your character.
Hmm.
What was the passion that ignited you to endeavor this trip around the world?
Well, I'm a bit of a history buff, and I'm very interested in we talked briefly about my father being a small businessman. He was a surveyor. Well, I'm Dutch to begin with. Both my parents were Dutch. My father, before immigrated to Canada,
Oh, you have it.
he was a merchant marine, or he was a merchant mariner, and then
You
he
speak
went around
Dutch?
the world.
You speak Dutch?
Heel klein beetje.
Hoe gaat het met je?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So,
I've studied in the Netherlands
and
long ago.
where, whereabouts?
The Hague. The
Oh, The
Hague.
Hague. Okay, so, yeah, if you speak to me in my parents' dialect, then I can understand that. So if you're from Friesland
Okay, yeah, that's
or
hard.
Groningen,
Uh-huh.
then like I'm gone. I
Yeah.
cannot. It's very difficult. But you know, both my father. I guess we're gonna. My father was born in Rotterdam, and then my parents met in Amsterdam, and all my relatives on my father's side, they used to live in Haarlem and Heemstede, very close to Zandvoort, and
Mhm.
so yeah, so my dad was a Dutchman, and so
Yeah.
was my mom. So that's where
So
I
hence
have
the
salt water
sailing.
in my,
Yeah, this
yeah,
explains
hence
it.
the sailing. So I have the salt water in my veins. I grew up sailing, blah blah blah. But uh, I and I sailed on in Canada where I live. All of Canada was mapped in a very short period of time. And the time that it was mapped by people who used the same technology because they were contemporaries of Cook and Bly and George Vancouver and Bodega de Quadra and La Perouse and all these, and every one of those people I just mentioned and dozens of others, including a bunch of Russians as well, sailed on this coast where I live. And you can get in a boat, sail to those places. You'll see the same trees, walk the same paths, look at the same beaches. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, including, I mean, the trees are bigger, but it's the same, literally the same tree. The trees will be 1,000 years old, 1,500 years old,
Wow.
800 years
Impressive.
old.
Hmm.
So I feel and because it was surveyed, like my father was a surveyor using this, and my dad used the same technology actually that Cook used, for example, to map Newfoundland and to map the St. Lawrence River as the British went up to fight the French and in the Plains of Abraham. So all this happened in a very short period of time. So I became completely enamored with traveling to all these places, um, anchoring in the same bays, trying to get some understanding of how all this happened. Because Canada is an incredibly difficult country to live in. Most of it is wilderness in ways
Hmm.
that most people can't imagine. It's brutally cold. There's nothing to eat because it's either just rock or forest or snow. And it was the people who lived here, but before these guys showed up, they lived, loved, and thrived on a land that was unbelievably difficult. And I was fascinated by that. So, and I approached it as because there's salt water in my veins, I was able to sort of touch all these places sailing. And then I realized that to get to all these places, these people had to sail around the world, which is a very, very difficult proposition. It ain't easy. Like Champlain, for example, de Champlain, who's responsible pretty much for putting Canada for if it weren't for him, Canada would not exist. He sailed from Europe to Canada 27 times in the 1600s.
Oh, wow.
27 times. People go across the Atlantic once in a cruise ship and they think they've done something, which
Hmm.
they have. People sail across the Atlantic, once in a sailboat and they think they've done something. But to do it 27 times in the 1600s when a trip took 3 months, half the crew would probably die. And you really and the navigation was basically by guess and by golly. It's astounding. And yet they were unbelievably good at what they did. Like the maps that some of these people made were some of the best maps for hundreds of years afterwards. So they were incredibly competent, incredibly tough, incredibly dedicated, and incredibly persistent. They had to have those four things. And that drew my attention. And sailing around the world was how you got to this part of the world where I live. So I figured if I wanted to know something about these people, then I should do that too. And I did it in a way that was as close to how they did it as humanly possible. So therefore, no electronic navigation, no, I mean, very,
How
very
did you
simple.
do that? I mean, I was once, the only time I've ever sailed was in not by myself, I was just there on board, but we sailed around Cuba and we had an accident. Actually, we hit a reef, although we
Yeah,
used GPS. So how did you
yeah.
sail without this technology? It's so dangerous, I find.
Yeah, that's what makes it so hard. So I used a sextant, which measures the altitude between a celestial or the angular distance between a star, the sun, the moon, the planets, and the horizon,
Mhm.
which is all of North America.
Hmm.
All of the world was first mapped using that technology, all of it. And as soon as we figured out how to tell time, or how to tell how far you were away, how far you were east or west of something, then that enabled us to create a map, to create maps that are almost as accurate as the maps we create today. So it wasn't north or south that was a problem, like how far north or south you are of something. It was how far east or west you were of something. And that you can do that if you can tell time. And that was a problem that was solved by basically a teenager in England who learned how to make a very, very sophisticated clock. And that was Cook was one of the first persons to take that clock, was really pretty much the first explorer to take that one of Harrison's clocks to sea and say, this is the way to do it. So the way that I tell time, I was measuring the distance between the moon and a planet or a star, the distance between those two things. And you can tell time, you doing that if you have a sextant. So it's
Wow,
mathematically,
I've never known this. This is
yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
So
But the planets are still moving. So how do
oh
you
yeah.
still tell time?
Oh, because you there because the moon is moving very fast, just like you said,
Hmm.
and we have a very good idea of how fast that might be and how those distances are
Got it.
changing.
Got it.
You can tell, because it's moving, then you can tell time. Like the Earth is spinning, right?
Yeah, right. But
So
then they have different elliptical ellipses, for example, the
yeah.
planets. So if they're coming out of a retrograde, they're still
Hmm.
moving forward, right? But they have
Hmm.
a different distance. So this
Yeah.
is all included in the measurement tool.
Yeah. So at the time that Cook was using lunar distance, with the methodology is called lunar distance. The British Admiralty was publishing in tables what those distances were at Greenwich. So at Greenwich, you had a book that said, say at 6 o'clock in the morning in Vancouver, my longitude, how far east or west I am of Greenwich. Um, I could use those distances that were published at Greenwich and I would know what the change is where I am.
Got it. Yeah.
Then the differences between those two, the differences that I could measure and the distances that you're talking about would enable me to tell time, because we know that the Earth rotates once every 24 hours. So that's the key. That's how you can use a clock. So
And did you
knowing
do this
some,
manually?
I did it manually.
Wow.
So and it's interesting. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way. So I would spend at sea, I would spend anywhere from 2 to 3 hours navigating, not because I was going to hit a piece of land, but I was trying to avoid storms and weather that I didn't want to get caught up in. So it's very, very hard.
Did you sail by
And
yourself alone?
yeah, by myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So yeah, solo nonstop around the world.
Uh-huh. How long did it take you?
265 days.
Wow. And
Yeah,
and did you
200.
did you sail on the northern hemisphere or how what was the trip?
No, the only way to do it is you have to basically you go as far south as you can, and then you go around the world north of Antarctica, because that's the only place where there's no, but basically there's no land, because otherwise you have to stop and go through the Suez Canal, or go through, you hit some other continental landmass, and you have to stop the boat and anchor it, or not anchor it, but you have to moor the boat or do something. The only way that you can actually do it is to go is to go around the world just north of Antarctica. So I went from Victoria, basically 6,500 nautical miles, or that would be in the order of 10,000 kilometers south, and then I went, you know, and then I went around the world, and then came 10,000 kilometers back north. So the total trip is 50,000 kilometers, something like that.
Mhm.
But most of it is going, 20,000 is going north and south, and the other 30,000 is going around the world,
Got it.
north of Antarctica.
I've heard, I don't know if that's really true, what I've heard is that the sea there is super dangerous. Like everybody
Oh
gets
yeah.
very nauseous. It's not like sailing in
No,
any other sea.
no. It's the most extreme
Yeah.
environment on the planet,
Wow.
because even if you're in Antarctica, you can you're you, you know you can you're on dry land. So if you're imagine you're on a sled in Antarctica, you can step off the sled onto dry land. And the weather is severe, but it's not like the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean, firstly, it's water. You can't walk on it. You can't breathe it. So as soon as you fall off the boat, it's all over.
Wow.
Because there's no land mass, the storms are out of this world. The waves build continuously because there's nothing to stop them. The storms are violent in a way that don't exist in any other ocean, just because there's no land mass to stop or mitigate or steer.
Mm-hmm.
So like hurricane force winds in those places where we know that there are hurricanes or call them hurricanes, they're confined to a geographical area maybe of 100 square miles because it's very local. They're very small and very local. But in the Southern Ocean, hurricane force winds will exist for tens of thousands of square miles in a single patch of ocean. And that turns the ocean into something you can't imagine. Yeah, it's violent. Like when I slept I couldn't do anything. Well, when I slept, as soon as you stop moving, how to say this? When I slept, for example, I slept basically with a seatbelt strapping me down to the bed because if I didn't I would get tossed from one side of the boat to the other. So and then
But
I had a little
how did you manage not to get toppled by the waves?
well the boats are designed. I mean you can't just go there in any boat. You have to go there with a boat that can withstand punishment that's out of this world.
Yeah.
And I turned the boat. Like masts are normally straight up and down, so I had the mast underwater at about 130 degrees, three different times. Like in the storm, the boat is mostly underwater
Uh-huh.
because of the waves.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very violent. Like, it's a very violent place. But what's interesting about that is that it's not malicious. There's nothing malicious or malevolent about a wave. It just happens to be what it is down there.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes that part of it really easy because there's nothing out to get you. You just happen to be in a place where it's like climbing a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
A mountain is not malicious. It's a very dangerous place, but it's not necessarily out to get you. You are your own worst enemy in those environments. And if you're not, and what's interesting in terms of just being an entrepreneur about that is if you operate under a very poor policy when you're at sea or when you're climbing a mountain, that poor policy is going to kill you. So the policies that you engage with have to be aligned perfectly with firstly your purpose and secondly the truth. I can't pretend there's no storm when there is a storm. I
Mm-hmm.
can't pretend that the storm is not coming my way. So you live in this world of nothing but abject truth. And if you choose to ignore that, you'll do it at your peril. And that's the same thing with business. If you want to pretend what your ideal customer is, you'll never make it. If you want to pretend that the market is not changing or that you can change the market, you'll never make it. If you're running Facebook advertising, for example, and you decide that you know better than Facebook who your audience is, then it'll never be a success. So you have to engage with really good policy, and if you don't do that, then it's a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm. So this is what you're doing now with your company, Lead Magnet AI?
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So with lead
Lead
brain,
Brain, Lead
yeah,
Brain.
sorry, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So lead brain in terms of good policy is that Google says do this, so we do that. We don't pretend. We don't give Google what it doesn't want. But we know there are no shortcuts, so we don't try to shortcut what they do. We know how Facebook, how they want you to use, simple things like pixels, and we don't try to shortcut that or tell them what we want it to do. We just do what they ask, which is just really good policy. So if you engage with good policy, then you typically get good results. So, and if you engage with bad policy, then guaranteed you're going to get bad results.
Mm-hmm. Where does persistence come in? Because you were talking about
Hmm.
good quality when sailing around the world. Where does persistence come when it comes to this type of business that you're doing? How do
Well,
you apply that?
it's going to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy. If it were easy, as they say, everyone would do it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be hard. And if you can't see your way through those times when it's hard and persist, in the most simplest way, then it will be impossible for you to succeed. And imagine Ronaldo, for example. He wasn't born, he wasn't born into the Premier League. He had to get there like everyone else got there. And of course, he's incredibly talented and all those things. But he's probably one of the hardest working soccer players, in the world. He persisted when he was very young and making sure that he had a skill set, or that he could maximize and leverage his skill set. And that takes persistence. And you can, you know, so it doesn't matter who you are, or what stage your business is at. You have to persist at those things that you do really well. And if you're engaged in good policy, that's pretty obvious. So you don't have to be smart. You don't have to be incredibly talented. You don't have to have a lot of money behind you, but you have to persist. So the one thing that's common to everything and to everyone and who's ever exceeded in any context is that they've persisted. And in terms of
How
well,
do you know
Facebook
if
app.
you're, how, sorry, Bert, for
Oh,
interrupting. How do you know if you're persisting in the right direction
okay,
on the
okay,
right thing?
that's a very 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 good question, and and I have a very good answer to that. Yeah, ask a good question, you'll get a good answer. So there's four P's, five actually, if you include policy. That's plan, prepare, practice, and persist. So firstly, you have to have a plan. And I don't care what the plan is, as long as you have one. The plan doesn't have to be good, but you have to have one. You have to have some sort of direction. Um, you have to, if you have a plan, then you have to prepare. So this is how I'm going to execute this plan. William Blake, 16th, 17th century British polymath, said that execution is the chariot of genius. So you have to have a plan, and then you have to prepare so you can execute. And then you have to practice. You have to understand that what it is that you're going to be doing as part of execution, that you're good at that. You don't have to be smart. You simply have to practice it. Like, you get good at anything by practicing. And then you have to persist. Once you have practice in place, and you're going to persist at doing those things that you practiced. And that brings you back to plan again. So if you're persisting at something, and have a when you return to your plan and look at it, is what I'm doing getting me in the direction that I thought I needed to be headed when I first created this plan? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you can persist in that direction. And if the answer to that question is no, then you need to tweak the plan. So if you read, everyone has to read Sun Tzu's Art of War if you're an officer. And the first thing that they say, well, one of the takeaways from that book is the first casualty of any battle is the plan. So that it's true as an entrepreneur. I don't know what the future is. I might plan to do something, but the future might very well change. The market might change. Google's algorithm might change. Your ideal customer is always a little bit fickle. Your skill set that you have in house, because you have this person leave and this other person come in. So all that changes all the time. So that your plan that you have in place when you don't know what the future looks like is, by definition, is going to change when the future arrives, because the future is going to be different. We know that. So you do this very simple iteration: plan, prepare, practice, persist, and then you re-examine the plan. And then if the plan gets tweaked, which it will, then you prepare a little bit different, you practice a little bit different, you persist a little bit different, then you come back to plan again. So if you do this in small increments, this is a positive feedback loop. And that you just simply get better and better and better, and your plan gets more and more refined. And that's in those tiny increments. That's how you can build a foundation that can help you succeed. And if you get back to, and if you ignore it, if you ignore the fact that the plan has changed, or that your execution is poor because you're not properly practiced and persisted, becomes a negative feedback loop. So instead of spiraling up, it spirals down. And because these things happen very quickly, then it's very easy for you to understand if you should quit, or if everything needs to be changed, because you will be well, it works, I suppose. If you'll forgive the analogy, it works like this. So you plan, prepare, practice, persist, and then you come back to plan, and you're slightly misaligned. But then you don't care. You just say, I'm going to continue doing the same thing. And the next time you come around to your plan again, you're even more misaligned. And the next time you're even more misaligned. And the next time you're even more misaligned if you're continually doing the same thing. I forget who said it's a definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. So by the time you come back around to plan, you're now 180 degrees opposite of where you want to go because you have some idea of where you want to go. So when you're headed in the opposite direction to the direction you want to go, it's time to quit. It's incredibly obvious. So
Okay, let me
I
ask you now this question. It's all clear about the plan, but you've been through experiences that require a rather good doses of luck as well. And knowing
correct.
that you've also been involved with the secret services in Canada or something
Mhm.
like that, it mentioned, yeah. I know that people are trained in arts like remote viewing and other similar intuition enhancing
Mhm.
capabilities, right? So, what role did this intuitive aspect of your knowledge, of your skill development, play in anything you've achieved? Is it only you would say like hard facts? This is the plan. This is my system. This is,
Yeah.
or is it also, or do you also use any of these intrinsic skills that you've
Yeah,
trained?
yeah,
Mhm.
I think that, that's a very insightful question, actually. No one has ever asked me that in that context. So that's kudos to you, I would say. It's very smart. It tells me that you have a very, very uh, profound insight into how these things actually work. So if you're doing if and let's take the sailing context because we're talking about that. Sailing is a very technical exercise, and I was doing it in a very technical way. And I'm embedded in a very technical part of navigation. That you have that intuitive part of your brain turned off. But embedded in nature like that, and when I again I'm talking about good policy, and the thing about planning, and this is counterintuitive, that you have to be divorced from the outcome and completely and utterly embedded in the moment.
Mm.
And when you can get completely embedded in the moment, which is really hard in normal civilization because life just sort of impacts on you when you're completely embedded in the moment, I call those places very, very thin places because not very much separates you from those things in the world and the universe in particular that are far greater than you. Like if you're at sea in a small boat and you think you're the most important thing on the planet and the universe, that there's nothing greater than you except you, then I have very bad news for you. And
Mhm.
you're going to get a proper lesson from nature very, very quickly. So being in those thin places allows your intuition to come through in ways that you cannot get when you're, sitting in a subway looking at a smartphone surrounded by 10,000 people
Yeah.
who that you just it's almost impossible because you have to all that all the unnecessary fluff has to go away. At least for people like me who have this really hard tech bent. So you have to get rid of all that stuff so that you can be completely embedded in the moment. And in those moments, it becomes very thin. What separates you from those things, like I said, that are greater than you is a very thin veil. It's an opaque veil. Typically, what would separate you from those things from your intuition is a smartphone.
Mhm.
You go to Google for all the answers, and it
Mhm.
doesn't have them all, or
Mhm.
Chat GPT. So your intuition, at least in those moments, speaks very loudly to you.
Yeah.
So although you're doing this very, as I've described it, this very pedantic sort of, P. So that's my 6 P, this pedantic,
Yeah.
thing. Then your intuition can speak very, very loudly. So you still have to listen to that. And one of the ways to listen to that is that an inanimate object like the boat can only take so much. And your intuition will tell you, you can't push this any harder.
Mhm.
Your intuition will tell you, I can't push myself any harder. So you have to back off to
Yeah.
understand what your own capabilities are.
So
And that's
would you say that you become a part of this environment around you
oh
then?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You cannot be divorced from your environment. It's impossible. Because if you do, that's just really bad policy. You know,
Yeah.
the you're if I'm, if I'm paddling on a lake and a river and there's a massive storm coming along, or you can feel a storm coming. The temperature drops, the barometric pressure drops, the birds all start doing something different, that the insects start doing something different. So if you're not paying attention to all that, and you get that from, you get that as in an intuitive sense because you're not actually counting birds flying past you. You just
Yeah.
notice something is different now,
Yeah.
and that speaks to you on a different level than counting paddle strokes or where am I on a map kind of thing. So that means that you're completely embedded in that environment, completely, which is part of living in the now. And if you choose not to do that, then you're missing a big part of the message that something is trying to tell you, and you'll do so at your own peril,
Yeah.
because now you're not engaged in a policy that's commensurate with the arena that you're in.
So when we talk about business, I can tell you at least how I've perceived it in my case. I understand very well the importance of systems and of
Hmm.
the right practices. But at the same time, there come moments of chance when a particular person appears with an idea, and then
Hmm.
something appears that is exactly what you at some point have thought you needed, and then they appear out of nowhere. It's not
Yeah.
that you consciously have worked towards,
Hmm.
attracting this person.
Hmm.
So circumstances and people very often come to you, and then it's on you
Oh
to
yeah.
judge,
Yeah,
do I
I
want to
would.
go in this direction or not? And how does it work for you?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's exactly the same, and in a slightly different context. So I would say that, um, well, uh, basically everything you need will be laid at your feet. Whether you choose to pick it up is up to you. Whether you choose to notice it is up to you. So these people
Mm-hmm.
so you have to travel. And this is something I've said all the time, is that you have to travel with an open heart and an open mind. And if you can't do that, then you're not really, you're a passenger.
Mm-hmm.
You're on a train that's going someplace that you have no, that it doesn't even matter. You don't even need to know. You're just on the train and just go somewhere. Or but if you travel with an open heart and an open mind, you'll see all these things cross your path, laid at your feet. And it's up to you whether you choose to engage with it. And I can give you a very specific context in which that was sort of revealed to me, if you want to use those frames, is that when you're going across Canada, the first problem you have is, where am I going to stay tonight? Because you're in the bush and you can't just, not every riverbank is suitable. And I can only go, 10 or 20 meters from the riverbank. I can't stumble into the forest, or, cross a great plain to find a place to stay. The land is very harsh.
How
You're
were
in
you
in a
traveling? By car? Give us some
no,
context.
no, I'm in a canoe.
That was still the boat, but you were getting off land, off
Well,
boat
I'm
on the
I'm when I paddle across Canada, I'm in a canoe.
All right.
So
Mhm.
I traveled by foot and by canoe
Mhm.
the 700-800 kilometers across the country, using following rivers and waterways that Champlain and Cartier and all these guys traveled. Basically, the first Europeans that came to this continent to map the continent, to discover it, and put it down on a piece of paper and say, this is what it is. So, and it's, if you're in the wilderness, on a river or on a lake, there's very few places that are actually suitable to stop, because you have to be safe. It has to be dry. It has to be, relatively protected. It can't be, you can't be, and there's every kind of wild animal you can imagine. So you can't just park your tent, on a game trail,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
none of that's. I had a bear come into the tent, as an example, with me
Wow.
in it. So,
Mhm.
so you, so. The first thing you have to worry about as soon as you get up is, where am I going to stay? Because you might be blown off the water by weather. You may not be able to. The river in this case might have changed course, and you have to get off and find a new way. So this idea of, where am I going to stop and stay, when I have to, whether it's to sleep or whether it's because of weather, is a huge problem. It starts the minute you get in the canoe and leave the last place that you were safe. Because it might be then, in an hour from now, there's a thunderstorm, or there's a storm that comes along. You can't be on the water. You can't get wet, because as soon as you get wet and stay wet, then you might get hypothermic, and nothing good happens to that. And I used to worry about that. And my solution was to rate campsites as I went by, on a scale of 1 to 5, and do that all day long, so that if something happened right now, I would look at shore, and if I hadn't seen a campsite that rated better than 1, as soon as I saw a 1 on the shore, then I'd get off there if I had to get off, and not look for, a 5 being the best.
Yeah.
And then I realized that every time I needed a place to get off the river, there was one there. Every single time that I needed a place to get off the river to the lake or whatever I was doing, I needed a safe place. There was one as soon as I looked left or right.
Yeah.
I thought,
Fantastic.
well, why am I worrying about it? Because every time I needed one, it was there.
Yeah.
So I stopped worrying about it completely. And there
Yeah.
was never an instant when I needed something when it wasn't there, if I was willing to look. And if I was traveling again with an open heart and and a two eyes wide open, then I realized it was revelatory to me, and I'm not by any way, shape, or form. Well, I would call myself a spiritual person at the very least, and certainly a religious person. So it wasn't this idea of something greater than me wasn't something I had an issue with, but how it actually related to do something very physical wasn't clear until that moment when I didn't have to worry about that. I just stopped worrying about where am I going to where can I stop to be safe, because it was always right there when I needed it. Then I looked backwards and examined all the other things I've done and realized that every single time I needed something, if I was willing to pick it up, then then it was there.
Hmm.
So my father would say you can have anything in the world you want as long as you're willing to pay the price. So as soon as you're clear on what you want, then just about everything you need is going to be laid at your feet. It's up to you to decide if you can pick it up and pay the price. And sometimes the price is pretty high, but but it's you. It's up to you if you pay the price. You can sail around the world. You don't need to be smart or skilled or anything. I'm living proof of that, but you have to be willing to pay the price. And sometimes the price is a lot, but by the same
Yeah.
token, the
Give us a
the
few
rewards are
examples of
great.
what can the price be theoretically? Because I can definitely follow your story, and I know what you mean by things being laid out for you. And
Hmm.
once you relax, it's basically, I don't know if you know this book, The Surrender Experiment. Um,
Uh, who wrote it?
Sinclair, was it?
Okay, so I haven't read it,
Yeah,
but
it's by
but
one very successful person in technology. They do medical software in the US, one of the largest companies for medical software. They keep all the records. Uh,
okay,
and he's also involved with the Temple of Now or something like that.
yeah.
I can't remember exactly, but he also talks about circumstances and people being laid out in front of him without him actually actively looking for them, but it turned out to be the right thing for him. So I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you now, can you give me an example of what is a possible thing that you might be asked to let go?
Okay, so in the context, let's talk about the context of sailing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you decide to sail around the world like I did, you will be afraid. Like you will be very, very afraid. And if you're
Yeah.
not afraid, then you're not. And if you're not scared, then you're either a psychopath or a sociopath or both.
Uh-huh.
So you have to understand that you're going to be operating in literally a sea of fear. So you have to let go of how fear can crush you in circumstances that it's very easy to become crushed. So I mean, think of it in the terms of paralysis of analysis. And um, the problem with fear is that if you're in a place where you're safe, relatively safe, you want to stay there. So I'm in the boat. The boat is it's violent. I know I have to get outside, which is patently which is incredibly unsafe. I'm safe where I am, but I need to go to a place that's much less safe. But I need to go there. Otherwise, the outcome is going to be very, very bad. Like the boat is going to be broken up into little tiny pieces and I'm not coming home, but I'm safe right now. So
Yeah.
you have this incredible amount of inertia that says you're safe. Why would you do anything that's less safe? Even though you know you have to do this thing,
Yeah.
you have to come to grips with how that will literally pin you to the ground like a weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing, if it's the same thing as an entrepreneur, you know that this path is not giving you the result that you want. It is partially successful, and in order to get to where you want to go, you might have to do something different. And anything that's different involves a risk, and that risk might be so great that it's going to keep you pinned where you are. So you have to have a strategy to deal with those things that pin you down. And typically that's fear. Fear will pin you down like nothing else in this world will. Um,
So
so
how do
I
you
mean,
deal
think
with fear in your
so.
case?
So
Mm-hmm.
how do you deal with it? And the thing I was going to say, if you look at it in the context of relationship, fear translates into vulnerability. So in order to actually have a meaningful relationship with anybody else on the planet, there's a degree of vulnerability which speaks to truth that you have to both engage in. And people are very afraid of being brutally honest, firstly with themselves, and secondly with someone that that they potentially care about. So if you can't get this idea, if you can't get past that, then things aren't gonna turn out very well. So how do you deal with it? It's actually really simple. There's a voice inside your head that says, no, 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 no. That's all it does is say, no, you can't, it's too far, it's too hard, you're too old, all these things. All it does is say no. And most people today might know it as the imposter syndrome, and it's been with us for a very long time.
Hmm.
Leonardo da Vinci on his deathbed was 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 said to have exclaimed that he had failed all of mankind because his work was not up to the standard, to the gifts and talents that God had bestowed on him. Leonardo da Vinci. And the same thing, Paul Dirac said the same thing, a famous, famous physicist. So basically, it's the imposter syndrome. It lives within all of us. Every entrepreneur I ever know thinks that he could be doing better. Every single one. They could be doing more. They could be doing what they're doing better. So this little voice inside your head says you're not doing good enough. It's too hard, it's too far, you're no good, all these things. But it's very, very stupid because it only knows one thing, which is no. So you take this very big task you have. I'm very, very afraid of getting outside, and I'm literally strapped down to my bunk. So I take this very big task of getting outside, which seems impossible, or paddling across the country or sailing around the world, and I break it up into the smallest, smallest little bit. So in terms of getting outside, and I'm lying down, I simply reduce that task to the thing that I have to do, the smallest thing I have to do to get me going in the direction I need to go, and that might be sitting up. So there's no difference as far as that voice inside your head is between lying down and sitting up, because it goes, well, what's the difference? You lie down, you sit up, who cares? So
Hmm.
it stops. And then the next thing is, well, can I stand up? And then the little voice inside your head doesn't know the difference between sitting down and standing up because it's not smart enough to. And it goes, okay, stand up. What do I care? Then you go, well, can I walk to the door? And it goes, what's the difference between standing up and walking? Anyone can do that. Anyone can walk to the door. So it stops. It doesn't say no. It just goes, do it. I don't care. If you keep doing those little tiny steps, pretty soon you're outside. So the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's the same concept. This isn't anything new. So you break down this giant thing that's in front of you that you're totally afraid of for very good reason and turn it into something that you're not, a little tiny step that you're not. And you keep building these little tiny, like to get outside on the boat in a storm takes an hour because that's how long it takes to get from A to B, to get dressed, and then to get outside because the boat is, it's like you trying to get dressed and there's 10 people in the room shoving you
Hmm.
randomly. As you try to put on a shirt or slip on a sweater, someone shoves you so hard that you fly across the room. It's hard to get dressed in those environments, so you just keep breaking that task up into little tiny bits, and the voice inside your head just shuts up because it doesn't know how to say no to two things that it can't differentiate, sitting down or standing up. So let's say you want to get fit and all you want to do, it's hard to go to the gym. It's hard to get outside and get on a bike or go for a run or a hike. It's much, much easier to lay on the couch and watch TV. And the voice doesn't know the difference between laying on the couch and sitting on the couch. So to get outside to go to the gym, to break that task down, which seems very, very hard, you break and you're hard translates into fear, um, or vulnerability, whatever context. You say, well, I need to get outside. I'm lying on the couch, but I can sit up again. And the little voice inside your head doesn't know the difference between the two. So that's how I get over things, that are those kinds of tasks that are fraught with peril, as I've said, and the kind of fear that will keep you pinned down.
Hmm. Did you analyze this post factum after you reflected on the experience, or were you trained to think this way?
Well, I had some experience of that in the Army because I was in the infantry, or certainly involved with the infantry, uh, and anyone who plays video games know that if you shoot behind a rock, everyone knows where you are now. So you're safe behind the rock, but everyone knows where you are. So as soon as you move away from the rock, which you have to do because now everyone knows where you are, you're moving from a very safe place in that moment into a through a place where you're very unsafe. Everyone knows where you're behind this rock. Now you have to go behind the tree, but you have to get from the rock to the tree, and in that instance, you expose yourself. So this we used to call it shoot and scoot. There's all other kinds. Everyone knows this, playing video games or formally trained to do it, I suppose. So I was familiar with this concept that you have to move from a very safe place to through an unsafe environment to do something that's more safe, even though the path is can be the path can be less safe than the place you're in. So translating that into something that you can do very simply, and something that you can translate into other contexts was something that I developed over time, certainly as a business, certainly as an entrepreneur. And then it becomes incredibly clear when you're in those environments, like I was at sea, where the choices are very simple and there's nothing else impacting that decision.
Fantastic. I don't want to water down this amazing conversation. So maybe if you're willing to, you can come back and we can continue
Sure,
talking.
sure.
Where can people find you and maybe test out the services that you have, or how does it work to engage with you?
Well, it's really easy to find me online. I have a very big footprint because it's a bunch of different things. So you can just go to bertterhart.com, BERTTERHART.com, and then you can choose the rabbit hole that you may want to go down. Or you can go to LinkedIn and find me on LinkedIn. It's the same sort of thing. If you want to, you can find me at leadbrain.ai. And if that's where you want to if that's where you want to reach out to me, you can do that there. So I had a very simple rule when it comes, because it takes a lot of courage to actually, I think it takes courage to reach out to people who you don't know, and ask good questions, and be vulnerable. Because when you're asking questions, when you ask a really good question, there's a degree of humility in that, because you're saying, I don't know this, or I would like to know this. So anyone who emails me, I email back. So if you want to reach out to me, you can find me in any one of those places. And if you have the courage to email me, I have the courage to email you back. So
That's a great promise. Thank you. I
oh,
enjoyed
you're
the
welcome.
conversation. It was a true pleasure having you on.
Well, it's like I said at the very beginning, it's always I'm always so incredibly pleased and honored to talk to people about what I've done, because I gain an insight into it that I would never have gained otherwise. People will have a perspective on what I've done and what I'm doing that I can't possibly imagine. So when I get that perspective, it's a real privilege, because it gives me a view and a perspective that I could never have imagined, would never have gotten myself. So I want to thank you today for that, because it's been a real thrill.
Fantastic. For me as well. I learned a lot and I enjoyed learning about your journey and about your experiences. It was like I was in a movie. Thank you.
You're welcome.